Hi,
We are the
Dyslexia Duo.
Each week, we sit down with amazing people, including top researchers and experts in dyslexia, powerful advocates, affected individuals, and more.
Together, we break down the myths, share real stories, highlight research and strategies to advise our listeners about this prevalent learning disability.
Come join us. Hey, Melissa.
Hey, Aimee.
So we have a very special guest with us
Yes, we
today.
do.
So excited about this. We have Dr. Molly Ness, but she gave us permission to call her Molly. And we're going to let her go ahead and introduce herself and explain to everybody who she is, because we've only been doing this since, I say only, we've been doing this since May of 24.
Yes.
May of 24. And some people may kind of understand our track that we follow and they know the structured literacy and the dyslexia side, or they may be new to this. So I like everybody to kind of introduce themselves to our audience.
Sure. So my name is Molly Ness. My background in a nutshell started as a classroom teacher and got a doctorate in reading education from the University of Virginia. And then I spent almost 20 years as a university professor conducting research, training early career teachers. And now I am working specifically with schools and districts who are implementing the science of reading. I always think that the last few years in the literacy landscape were almost the easy work. Not that any of this is easy, but what I mean is it's easy to explain what Scarborough's rope is and the simple view is, but what the real challenge is the longitudinal implementation of and systemic change that needs to happen for implementing the science of reading. So I'm doing work around that. I write books for teachers. I'm currently working on my 7th book, and I sit on the board for the World Literacy Foundation as well.
Wow,
Ooh.
that's amazing.
Literacy. Okay, so what inspired your early focus on reading disabilities and dyslexia in particular?
Yeah, I distinctly remember working in my 6th grade classroom with kids who couldn't read or had early literacy skills that were at kindergarten level. And I just, as a, fresh out of college, totally idealistic 22-year-old, did not understand, could not fathom how the system had failed them and continued to promote them to a point where they're in middle school and had entirely lacked basic reading skills. So I was always interested in what went wrong, how to better meet the needs of kids with challenges, kids with diverse backgrounds, diverse languages, diverse reading needs. And I also got really interested when I was a university professor and started a field of research around teachers' knowledge of dyslexia, because I recognized that there was a whole sophisticated body of research that really helped us understand what dyslexia was, but that was not being conveyed to people who needed it, people who were going out in the field. And so in 2010, I published my first paper specifically looking at teacher knowledge about dyslexia and have always continued to stay close to that work to support teacher knowledge to improve practice.
Wow. And we're on board with that. Melissa and I have talked to a lot of people who say the same thing. It's getting a little better, but it's not quite there yet. I don't know. Maybe we'll be singing a different tune in 5, 10 years and everybody will be on board. But my goodness, I got my master's in 2018 and still wasn't a lot of talk about it. And when I got my bachelor's in 91, there was no talk about dyslexia.
Yeah, my research paper that I did with a colleague, we surveyed about 500 teachers across multiple states and basically asked them, what's dyslexia? How do you identify kids with dyslexia? How do you intervene with kids with dyslexia? And these were students who had completed their literacy courses, they had completed their special ed, so they were literally like about to graduate and go out into the field. I think it was 74% of our population perpetuated the myths about dyslexia, that it's word reversal, seeing things backwards. And I just remember being furious by it. It would be one thing if these were students at the beginning of their education.
Right.
But they all had taken the courses. And anytime I look at research, I don't blame teachers. Instead, I step back and say, where did the system fail to deliver the information to them in a way that was practical, applicable, relevant to their needs. And that's work I've been doing since. And I'm pleased to say that research has been picked up and carried on by people who came after me. That has been replicated. It has been looked at with different participants. So other people looked at principal and school leader knowledge of dyslexia, all these sorts of different formats of the same essential research question. And yes, getting better, but still not good enough.
No, and I think my concern with continuing in teacher knowledge at the college level is that there's such a high turnover of teachers right now. So we get somebody on board, and then for whatever reason, they're out in what is the range, 5 to 7 years, or maybe it's less now. It used to be 5 to 7 years. It may be 3 to 5 years now before they leave the profession. And we have a whole other group of people that we need to train in the science of reading and understanding dyslexia and all of that.
We talked to Dr. Chambray and Dr. Anderson. Dr. Chambray's at Keene and Anderson.
He was my doctoral student.
Oh, great. Yes,
Yep.
yes,
Yep.
good. Well, you did great work with her. She was wonderfully brilliant at the way she shared how this is just systemic and the misknowledge of dyslexia. And then also she brought up a good point about that the social media is coming in and taking a hold and making that just be replicated over and over, all the misinformation about dyslexia. And so it starts with the university level not giving the people the correct information, and then that social media piece just keeps letting it go out incorrectly. And it just is, it almost seems insurmountable to get that information out to the right people and in the right way.
It does. And when I feel those moments where things feel like, wow, this challenge, how are we ever going to make a dent in it? I actually try to step back and say, we're at really an exciting moment in the literacy landscape. And by that, I mean, I've been in this field for 30 years, and at no other point have so many eyes been on us, eyes outside of the classroom and school leaders. By that, I mean podcast movies, documentary films, mainstream media. I actually have opened up the New York Times and found articles about literacy. I was just at Sundance Film Festival, which everyone knows Sundance is this about. There was a day that was literacy as a public health initiative. So I'm really inspired by how many people are looking to us as literacy leaders, knowing how important reading is to a child's life trajectory and our society overall. So, yes, huge amounts of challenge, but we got to take this moment and lean into it and be really intentional about how we use the attention on us about improving the literacy landscape for all of our kids.
Absolutely. So you have a podcast too?
I do.
Yes. So tell me about your podcast and how does it help expand your mission around literacy and dyslexia?
Sure. So I'm always thinking about access, and access has lots of forms. Access to research, access to high quality instructional materials, to teachers, all the things. And so in 2019, I read research by Susan Newman, who is now a professor at NYU. She was previously the Assistant Secretary of Education under W. Bush. And she looked at the availability of print and found that in high poverty areas, one book would have to be shared by over 800 kids in order for kids to read outside of the school walls. And I just was completely floored that at that time, that book access was an issue. I didn't know the statistics show 32 million American kids lack access to books in homes, schools, and communities. So I did what I always do, which was I go down the research rabbit hole, and I have something to say, and I was like, I should write a paper about this. And my teenager at the time said, nobody reads anything you write, so why don't you do a podcast instead? And so I turned it into a podcast, and the podcast is called End Book Deserts. Book deserts being places where books are hard to come by or scarce. And so in it, I have about 50 episodes where I interview people who are doing the work to get books to kids. Everybody from, a grassroots organization to a Dolly Parton Imagination Library. And there are so many passionate literacy advocates working in really innovative and creative ways. And I'm super excited that As a sort of trickle down effect from this podcast, there's now a National Book Access Association, and that in March of 2026, a bill will be introduced to the Senate floor by Senator Andy Kim of New Jersey to address book access. So with all of these people coming together, we now have congressional eyes on what we can do to get books to kids.
If there's a bill coming through, what are some of the ideas that's coming about getting books in the hands of kids who traditionally wouldn't have it?
Yeah, so the bill allots funding for organizations who are doing this work to get significant grant money. And all of these organizations have been so savvy about reaching kids and families where they are. So there are organizations that put up book vending machines outside of the Boys and Girls Clubs and WIC centers. There's barbershop books, knowing that in many Black communities, barbershops and salons are like the cultural hotspot. So they train salons and salon owners to talk to kids about books and reading while get haircuts. I mean, the innovation is just wild. People are so smart. They recognize that, okay, if a family is coming to a food bank to get food, they are likely limited in their time, limited in their resources. And so they take huge warehouses and say, okay, here's the food bank, here's the diaper bank, here's the school uniform bank, here's the book bank. We're going to put it all under one roof to be mindful of our patrons having limited time, limited resources. So let's collect all these things that people may need and make it one-stop shopping.
Oh, that's so smart.
Right.
That
No,
is
it's not.
so smart.
I love it. That's wonderful. And, I think about how it just takes a lot of people knowing what needs to be done, people who are so incredibly gifted at sharing their resources, sharing their intelligence to get that out. I would have never thought to put books by a barbershop. What a great idea.
Well, and most of us don't even know that book access is actually an issue. Like it should.
Right.
These are things that are readily available, relatively easy to disseminate. If we're trying to raise kids as lifelong readers, no child should go without books at home.
And one of the things that you had said, not just putting the books in those places, but teaching the people who work at those areas how to talk to kids about books or talk to them about the book that's there. Because I know when I was still in public ed, I've been retired since 2021. But when I was still in public ed and working with students in a dyslexia setting, when I'd start to read out loud to my kids, nothing lit a fire under my kids to read a book as to when they saw me enjoying that book I was reading to them. So I think that's crucial. I really do.
Well, you're getting at two things that resonate with me. Number one, we know that the way families and kids get messages about what they should do for their kids with regard to literacy, when they hear that message from many people in their lives, meaning their teacher, their pediatrician, their salon, their Boys and Girls Club counselor, that's more likely to have longstanding change than just saying the same thing over and over. It has to come from all of these trusted people in kids and families' lives. And then you're also getting at my real love, which is building language comprehension through read alouds. That was my 5th book that I wrote and came out at a time that the science of reading was like just starting to percolate, but everybody was just talking about phonics and decoding. And there's this whole other side of reading development, which is language comprehension. And fortunately, we can support kids' language comprehension development through the beloved read aloud, as long as that beloved read aloud is really intentionally planned, where we are modeling what we are doing as proficient readers to build comprehension, where we're selecting vocabulary, where we are not just pulling a book from the shelf and going, but really leaning into the opportunities that book offers.
So what are some of those strategies you would recommend? I'm so fascinated by this because I think that is one thing where if you are not in academia, you might not know what questions as a parent to sit there and ask and talk about with your child, or you might not know what facts to remind them of. So what are some strategies?
Yeah, so I typically have my top 3. Now I hope I can remember all my 3 pieces of advice to give to parents about maximizing read alouds. Number 1, for younger readers, so kids who are age 2 and up to maybe age 6-ish, do something called a print-focused read aloud. So we know that when kids are reading with parents, reading aloud with parents, kids' eyes fixate on the pictures. Anybody who has read
Yes.
aloud to a kid knows your kid freaks out if you can't see the pictures. So
Yeah.
their eyes naturally gravitate towards the pictures. And when they just look at the pictures, they're missing early literacy skills. So what we can do as a parent, super easy, is directly call kids' attention to the print on the page and build their understanding of the forms and functions of print. So with a 3 or 4-year-old, it's as easy as watch my finger. I'm going to start reading at the top of the page. When I get to the end of a sentence, I'm going to sweep it to the next line. I go top to bottom, left to right. It's pointing out things like speech bubbles when you read an Elephant and Piggy book. Oh, this bubble above Piggy's head, that's the same color as Piggy. I know that's letting me know what he's saying. For kids who are 5, 6, 7, it's can you point to a letter in your name? Can you find a long word? Can you find a question mark? So it's literally print focused. And what we know is that obviously it draws kids' attention to print in ways that leads to long-term literacy changes. So simple, but most of us just don't do it. So we're missing out on one of the opportunities as we read aloud. Number 2, for readers of all ages, read more informational text. And informational text is a specific category of nonfiction text that typically tells about the natural or social world. So it tends to be science and social studies texts. And what we know is that parents don't typically read about informational text. It's not as warm and fuzzy to read about, plant life as it is to read Goldilocks before bed. But we also have research that shows that kids don't get much of that in early childhood education. And then they come to their former schooling where they're using 50% of their time in informational texts and they don't know what to do. So for me, it is leaning into what is going on in a kid's life to select informational text. Informational text has exploded. There's so many available at the public library and commercially available. So it's, hey, we're having an ice storm next weekend. Let's go to the library and find books about the water cycle or about snowplows or about, your class is going on a trip to the pumpkin patch. Let's go get books about pumpkins. So it's taking what is already happening in a child's life and bringing that informational text in. Because again, we typically don't read it to kids. And there's a lot of readers who they prefer that. There's some research that shows that boys prefer informational text over girls. Informational text also lets you kind of wander around, meaning you don't have to do start to finish. You can read page 18 and then read page 3, which for kids who don't have longer attention spans is really an opportunity. And then number 3, I wish all parents, and I actually wish all teachers would do this, think aloud when they read aloud. And by that, I mean, we know that lots of kids struggle with comprehension. And all of us well-intentioned parents and teachers, what do we do when we read aloud? We ask kids questions. But that's actually not building their comprehension. It's assessing their comprehension. I don't want a snapshot of yes, they get it or no, they don't. I want to build their comprehension. So I can do that with whatever text we're reading aloud by a think aloud. And a think aloud is super easy to do, first person, narrative language. It's almost like we're cracking open our head and giving kids the words that we are using as proficient readers to make meaning. So typically when I do it, I point to the side of my head. I give kids a visual signal of, hey, when you see my finger here, I'm thinking about what's going on in the book. And the reason I do that is because it's a differentiation of which words are in the page and which words are in this metacognitive place of my brain. So that physical reminder is a nice concrete thing for kids to hang on to. So it's everything from I'm getting the sense that this boy must be frustrated, so I'm modeling making an inference. Or I wish I could ask the author why ... modeling that I'm generating a question. Or the big idea for me here is, and I model a summarization. That's what builds kids' comprehension when they see us do it. I'm literally using first-person narrative to talk through what I'm doing to make meaning so that kids not only better understand the book that we're reading, but they have a model of what it means to comprehend, to emulate when it's time for them to do the reading.
Interesting.
Is this
Oh
when
my
you would pull in
gosh.
text to self, text to world, those types of connections
I
as
mean, you
well?
can use, yeah, you can use whatever strategy comes naturally to you. I tend to choose places that are confusing in a book and model, wow, wait, I'm really confused here. I have to stop and reread or slow down or figure out what this word is, because anytime we can normalize, well, you're a grown up, you're an adult, and there are things you don't understand, then we're helping kids be okay with their struggles. And we're giving them something to metacognitively do, meaning lots of kids, if they get to a part they don't understand, what do? They keep reading.
Yeah.
Well, what can we do? We can model what we as proficient readers do when our comprehension train goes off the track.
Oh my
I
gosh.
love that.
Yeah,
Thank you so
this is
much.
great. This is great. And I wrote down some of the notes and I had a couple of connections. So you were talking about not just looking at the pictures, but looking at the words for the little kids and then the older kids. And it made me think of my student. I have an older student that I'm working with who's 13, and she has never read the Diary of a Wimpy Kid book. So we're reading those together, but they're graphic novels. And like graphic novels, when there's a dialogue, it has the bubble for the other person, the bubble. And she was trying to go straight down and then straight down. I'm like, no, no, this is a dialogue between Greg and Roderick, right? And so he's going to speak, and then this bubble is for Roderick, and then this bubble is for Greg, like it's a dialogue. And she's like, oh, that makes so much more sense
Totally.
now, that type of things. And one of the other things you were talking about was the informational text. And I remember when I was getting my master's a few years back, I had one professor who did talk for that 1 hour about dyslexia, but she was talking about, instead of just doing fiction with your students, bring in those nonfiction pieces, because that's what we read the most as
Sure.
adults. And they have to get used to the different format. I mean, you may or may not have the same attachment that you do, but it's something that they have to get used to doing. And I do love that explicitness, because sometimes when my kids are reading or I'm reading to them and I want to stop and ask a question, I'm like, am I going to speed bump their comprehension if I do that? Are they going to lose their train of thought? And you just go, when do I ask? But like a nonverbal cueing would, I think, stop that speed bump from occurring. I love
Yeah, I'll never forget when I was working with a struggling sixth grade kid. I started doing the think aloud and gave him the visual cue. And he looked at me like right away, super puzzled after I did a think aloud. He's like, whoa, 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 whoa. All that stuff that you said when your finger was on your head, that's what I'm supposed to do when I'm reading. I was like, yeah, reading it. No one had even told him that, like, this, because this stuff is just invisible. I can't see it as a kid. So when kids get that, they're like, oh, okay, now I see the behavior I'm supposed to do. And about
Yeah.
the nonfiction, like nonfiction has different text structures, it has more technical vocabulary. So we have to introduce it earlier, and we have to help kids understand that all of the different features of it, that the subtitles act like a map, that tiny little print below a picture describes what the picture is. Like, we can't assume any of those text features that are specific to nonfiction text, that kids are familiar with them.
And that's brilliant. And I can remember even being in school, like fifth or sixth grade, and we're reading our science book, and maybe it's something that was hard for me to understand. And they'll have a diagram of maybe a cross section of a plant, and it has a little wording underneath the picture that I'm like, oh, okay, now I get what they're trying to say. It was a clarifying piece for
Yeah.
me, but
Like,
it's not for everybody, doesn't realize that.
no, and you know what a lot of kids do? Free space. I don't need to read that
You're
stuff.
right.
They jump
I
right.
remember my kids asking me that before. Do I have to read the stuff below the picture? Yes. Read the stuff below the picture. It's going to help you.
Now, what are your thoughts though on, I just heard another lady, she's not a language doctor, she has not studied language, in my opinion. She is somebody who's like a journalist who spent time researching the brain. She does brain drawings. Like, she's just phenomenal. I don't know if you've ever heard of her. Her name is Rita Carter. And I just saw her do a TED talk about a couple weeks ago. And she talked about how fiction text is so important for the way the brain develops as well, because it just gets the kids to go into this imaginary world and come up with solutions to problems that they might not ordinarily come up with. And what are your thoughts on fiction text compared to nonfiction if we were going to be doing this think aloud?
Yeah. So I'm a classically trained reading researcher, meaning every decision I make, I ask myself, is there research for it? So I've
Mhm.
never seen any research, and I hope I'm wrong because science is always changing and evolving. I've never seen any research that looks at neural differences between fiction and nonfiction text.
Mhm.
I would be hard pressed to believe that the brain can differentiate the two because it's all language and it's all great. I have seen some pretty significant research that shows that when kids read or listen to narrative text, their empathetic skills improve. And
Mm.
I know our world could use more empathy now
Yeah.
because what does fiction text do? It introduces us to a new situation or a character that is unlike us, and we have to put ourselves in somebody else's shoes and perspective take, and that's empathy. I very much believe kids should have access to all types of text, fiction and nonfiction, all formats of text, meaning audiobooks, e-readers, the good old classic picture book. They should have access to reading the same book over and over. They should
Mhm.
be able to read books that are not at their quote unquote level. Because to me, we are building reading motivation, and that is something we can't undermine as teachers and as parents.
Wow.
Good to know.
Yeah.
Okay, so how does comprehension instruction intersect with dyslexia support?
Yeah, so we know that so many kids with dyslexia mass underlying word identification challenges. So I've worked with lots of kids who have been really savvy and compensating. Their struggle is to, I often call word identification lifting words off the page. It's literally just recognizing the word and identifying it. So that part's really weak, but they trick you because they've got great vocabulary and background knowledge and they talk all around it, not because they actually read the text, but just because they're super savvy and they're sort of masking for their underlying deficiency. When I think about those two things, we have to make sure that all kids, whether they are neurodiverse kids or typical readers, are getting both support in word identification and comprehension. And for me, that is reading aloud from more sophisticated text than kids can read on their own. We know that actually there's a significant difference in children's ability to understand what they read versus what they listen to. So our listening and our reading comprehension don't align until like middle school, which to me is as a reminder, like if you've got a first grade class, you should be reading to them at books that are third grade, because what are you giving them? Lots of great vocabulary, lots of great background knowledge that they're not going to get in the decodable books that they're reading on their own. And then what we know is pretty much all kids need some support in comprehension. I'm doing a lot of work now in middle schools, and middle school teachers will come up to me and be like, I'm the biology teacher, or I'm the social studies teacher, and they can't understand the text. They don't understand the passage about cellular division or ancient Mesopotamia. Give me a comprehension strategy to fix it. And I sort of say, like, you don't want my answer, because my answer is it's not comprehension. Because really, if you look at it, so many of kids' comprehension struggles are actually masking underlying word deficiencies. They can't lift words off the page accurately, automatically, efficiently. And so what happens is they become disfluent readers. And then what happens is they're using up the precious brain power that they should be using to comprehend. They're using it for word identification.
Yeah.
So anytime somebody says to me, like, what about comprehension? I pump the brakes. I'm like, we actually have to see, is the comprehension struggle just a mask for underlying word deficiencies? Because we can teach comprehension strategies until we're blue in the face, but we're putting a Band-Aid on a gaping wound. And until you address the underlying wound, we're not going to see any progress.
And now a word from our sponsor.
Hey, Melissa.
Hey, Aimee.
So let's talk about who we met at IDA, Tumbleweed.
Oh, I love Tumbleweed's decodable books, and they're for striving readers in grades 2 through 6. My favorite thing about them, in addition to the storylines, is the inclusion of comprehension, spelling, and vocabulary activities.
Yes, and there's no guessing because they took out the visual distractions. They still have illustrations, but not right next to the print.
And Tumbleweed is easy to implement with any core or intervention program. Their teacher guides are jam-packed with multimodal approaches.
Check them out at tumbleweedpublishing.com.
Hi, this is Aimee Regenroth, and as part of the Dyslexia Duo podcast team and owner of Discovery Dyslexia Services, I want to talk to you about my business. Our COUT-trained team offers expert virtual or in-person therapy located in Prosper, Texas, using proven dyslexia curricula like Take Flight, Build, MTA, Alphabetic Phonics, and Reading by Design. We also provide crucial independent evaluations and advocacy services. Don't wait. Empower your child today. Visit www.discovereed.com to learn more. That again is www.discoveread.com. Discovereed, covering all your dyslexia needs. Let's return to the show.
I have another question regarding that. So I've had some students, and maybe this is more of a developmental language disability, but I've had some students before that actually do really well with their word recognition, but their comprehension is still lagging behind.
Sure.
So,
Yeah. What do you do?
well, that's always been my trouble. I'm just trying to figure out. So have they visually mapped the word and they've memorized that word? But when they go to read it, they're not really understanding the word because they are just almost looking at a picture.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or is it a mixture of both? They don't really understand the language because they don't have enough words that they've
Yeah.
actually learned how to read.
I think it's both. I think we do have a smaller number of kids that are, I always called them word callers. They can bark at print, but they don't know what it means. And now the research field is calling them developmental language delay or developmental language disorder kids. Research is showing actually that in a general classroom, there are more kids who struggle with developmental language delay than with dyslexia, but yet we don't screen for it. And we don't really train teachers to know about it. I hope in 10 years we'll be at a different place. So I always would ask myself, like, okay, is there actually a language deficit here that I have to address? And then if that has been ruled out, I think a lot of their comprehension struggle rests on vocabulary and just a lack of access to all the things, to explicit instruction where we're modeling comprehension and not just asking kids questions to see if they understood it, where we are building their vocabulary, where we're helping kids understand that what you know about a topic or a text makes you a better reader going into the text. So I think it's anything with comprehension is such a struggle because there's so many factors that influence comprehension. It's so highly personal. When I was a doctoral student, I very much remember going into my advisor's office and saying, I've decided I want to do my dissertation on comprehension. And he goes, could you choose something easier? Because comprehension is so darn complex. We don't really have great measures of comprehension. We can't necessarily tease out all of the individual factors that influence somebody's comprehension. So it's a complicated entity.
I feel like the same. I feel the student that I'm particularly thinking about, what I've been working on is the no glamour cards. I have those cards where I'm asking details. Okay, what do you see in this picture? What don't you see in this picture? Asking questions about exclusionary things that are in the picture or not in the picture. There's just a lot of different tactics I'm using, plus in trying to increase the vocabulary, and the frustration level goes way up with
Sure.
those types of tasks. So I definitely agree with you. I think the vocabulary is a huge component, but I think also just a matter of being so frustrated that the
Yeah.
shutdown happens right away.
Yeah. And I always think of comprehension as like a house of cards because your comprehension of a paragraph can fall apart at the individual word level, like you don't know the meaning of a word.
Right.
It can fall apart at a sentence level. If I say the sentence, the girl standing next to the woman was wearing the red dress. And then I ask a kid, who was wearing the red dress? Most people say the woman, right?
Yeah.
But yes, because they don't have the syntactic understanding. That was a phrase that the red dress goes back to the girl. So
Right.
another comprehension fall apart. at the sentence level. And then comprehension can fall apart at like the general chunk of text level, the paragraph, the page, because to comprehend something, you have to synthesize all of these things coming in together and figure out what's essential, what's non-essential. And so you start to see how sophisticated comprehension is. Whenever I work with teachers, I take a simple paragraph from a children's book and I'll highlight words in red that are potential vocabulary issues. Then I'll highlight in purple those syntactic challenges. Then I'll highlight in green another. And you look at, by the end of it, the paragraph is all rainbow colors to demonstrate how many places comprehension could fall apart.
And okay, so I've been teaching this week in training, and one of the things I've been really honing in on is grammar, right? Parts of speech. And I had one of my trainees, now she's a year one, so it's just, she's new in it, but she was getting frustrated with grammar and identification of parts of speech and all that. And she just threw up her hand. She goes, why are we doing this? What's this going to help? I said, one, obviously it's going to help their composition. When it's time for writing, it's going to help that. I said, but it helps their comprehension as well. And it feeds back into what you were saying, the vocabulary and the comprehension and the syntax of all of it. If you can identify what part of speech this is, it's going to help with your understanding. And I couldn't call any research at that moment because I was in the middle of teaching. I said, but there's lots of research out there to support that. So she stopped talking for a minute. But one of the things that I was making a connection with what you were saying was that whole comprehension. There's so much. I have a private practice also. And it's not just dyslexic students, but students who might need help in just reading and writing overall. And the parents will say, well, he's having a problem with comprehension. I'm like, okay, so how far back am I going to figure out where the actual issue is with the comprehension, right? And so I had one student, he had good decoding. He was very fluent. It really was the vocabulary piece that was hindering his comprehension more than anything. And I wanted to tell the parents, so I went from vocabulary to comprehension. It kept going back and forth between the two. And I told the parents, this isn't going to get remedied in a year. We need constant and lots of exposures. And I think they were hoping I'll be a magic pill, but I'm not by any stretch.
There's no added pill for any of this.
No, absolutely. And I felt like I disappointed them, but I did what I could, in the little bit of time that we had.
Actually, I always say, when I was at University of Virginia, they had an amazing reading clinic that I was fortunate to be able to run when I graduated. And I would always say, on any given day, I would prefer you give me a kid who struggles with word identification than comprehension, because I can fix the word identification pretty quickly.
Yeah.
The other stuff has so many factors. I'm working now with a school that for the first time ever is really putting robust screening in for every K through 5 kid. They had been using Fontes and Pinnell and are trying to move forward with data that's more valid and more rigorous and all the things. And this particular adoption, the screener that they adopted, starts with fluency. The first thing that teachers get is an oral reading fluency. And I had to really, really work with teachers to help them understand, why are we starting with fluency? And I kept saying, fluency is like the crossroads where you can get a measure at that crossroad. You can know, okay, I need to back up and address their word identification, or all systems are a go, and I'm looking more down the road with how do I support them with comprehension.
Yeah, I agree with that.
I'm 100% there with my student that I was talking about earlier. I just don't know which one is the best way to go. She kind of needs both.
That most kids do. There was a researcher, I think it was Scott Paris, who, I may be quoting them wrong, but he called them garden variety poor readers. They're not dyslexic. They're not kids who struggle. They have a little bit of weakness in everything. And those garden variety poor readers, again, are many times even more difficult because you got to address the word identification and you got to get the language comprehension. Word identification is a skill that's constrained, meaning it has a very clear scope and sequence. You know when they've reached at the end of their letter sounds, and then you move on to this. But vocabulary and language and all those things are not. You can learn a new vocabulary word every day and never reach the end of the dictionaries.
Right.
it's a little bit more challenging to know where to start and what scope or sequence or path to move along on.
Wow. Well, let's dive into your newest book, Making Words Stick, right?
Yeah.
Because that is the newest one. It's 2025. I can't imagine
It
you got
is,
two
it
in
is,
one
yeah.
year, unless you put out something like in the last couple of weeks.
No, we're working on a follow-up to Making Words.
That's what I thought I had read. I thought that was really cool. I wish I had the ability to have so much knowledge that I could put it in the book. I know a lot about a little bit, I guess.
We all do well, but
I think.
I always joke, like, if you gave me People magazine or like turn on the Grammys, I would know like
know all
20%
that.
of who the people are.
Yeah.
Totally be like that middle-aged woman that's like, where's she from? But you say something within read and I'm like, yeah, I know that. Or yeah, I know him, or I've worked, yeah, that kind of thing. But I know a lot about this little tiny bubble of literacy stuff.
Yeah, no, I feel that way about my dyslexia and instruction and all that. But your book centers on orthographic mapping and the cognitive process by which readers embed words into long-term memory, which is hard,
Yeah.
especially if they've got a comorbidity like ADHD or something like that's inhibiting that short-term memory to get it into the long term. So can you explain orthographic mapping and why it's so important for fluent reading, especially for our kiddos with dyslexia?
Yeah. Orthographic mapping has actually been in the research since the 1990s, but it was not made like well known because it was in these academic conferences and journals. And orthographic mapping is this behind the scenes cognitive process by which we permanently store words into long-term memory. A couple of things I want to break down in that. Behind the scenes or cognitive process. By that, I mean it's happening in the brain. It's not an activity, meaning I wouldn't say to kids, all right, let's orthographically map this word or pull out your orthographic mapping workbooks. And I was reminded of this because I was working with a family that a child had gotten a neuropsych evaluation. And the family had spent an arm and a leg to get this. And they give me this 30-page report to a family that's gobbledygook. They have no idea what it is. So they basically say, what do we do? What does this mean? And what do I do with it? And the neuropsych identified the child had an orthographic mapping deficiency. I was like, what is that? Book on orthographic mapping. And I've never heard of that because it doesn't exist. They just made something up because, again, it's this cognitive process. But it is this process that lets every word become a sight word, a word that we instantly recognize. So lots of people confuse sight words and high frequency words. Sight words are a status symbol, meaning you have to earn the status to become a sight word. And my sight word vocabulary is different than your sight word vocabulary based on our daily lives. Like I have a friend who is Irish. Her name is Aoife. It is spelled Aoife. That's a sight word for me. But if you taught on the page, you'd be like, I have no idea how to say it because it's we live different lives. We have different worlds. High frequency words are the ones that appear in the text the most frequently. Literally somebody, Dr. Dolch and Mr. Fry or Mr. Fry, however, they actually like literally did the painstaking research of way back when, going through the most common books that were read at the time and then like tallying up. Can you imagine how painful that research would be? But to store words in the mind, in our long-term memory, so that we never have to decode them, we need three things. And I think of it as like a three-legged stool. We need the phonology of the word, so how the word sounds. We need the orthography of the word, so how the word is spelled or how it appears on the page, its written representation. And that's also its like letter-sound correspondence. And then we need the meaning of the word, not just the definition, but how to use the word, how to apply the word, how to use it semantically correct, what it's like, what its characteristics are. So when these three legs of the stool come together, kids then have the word, so it's a sight word for them, and they don't ever have to decode it. And why does it matter? It matters because the more words that you have orthographically mapped, the more fluent you are as a reader. And if you don't have enough words orthographically mapped, your fluency falls apart because you're doing this laborious process of decoding. And then what pays the price is your comprehension, because our brain can only do so much at one time. If you're asking me to do the really hard work of letter sound correspondence, blending, phonics, all of that to just get the word off the page, then my reading slows down and comprehension pays the price. So I always try to tell people that we care about orthographic mapping because it is the on-ramp to comprehension.
Wow. I'm writing some good. Have you used the three-legged stool in your book as an analogy?
Yeah, and I often use it when I talk about function words. So function words, and this is really relevant to kids with dyslexia, function words are those little words. Like if you ever played charade and you did little word, function words are little words. They're auxiliary verbs, they're prepositions, they're the words like were and from and off and there. Not only are they challenging because a lot of them visually look similar, like the W words, obviously, but more importantly, especially for English language learners and kids with dyslexia, they're challenging because they don't really have a meaning. Go look up the word from in the dictionary. What's it mean?
Yeah.
Go look up the word. How do you define of?
Yeah.
So if I think about that three-legged stool, I'm kicking away one of the legs. I'm kicking away that's the leg that's meaning. Well, no wonder my stool gets wobbly.
Yeah.
And when I was working with a lot of really struggling readers in this reading clinic, I just kept noticing that time and time again, those function words, kids struggle with them. And now I know it's because they don't have the meaning behind them, so that word becomes orthographically mapped.
So what brain process goes with the orthographic mapping most often? I do see trouble with a lot of kids being able to orthographically map words in my private practice. So.
Yeah. So orthographic mapping, it activates all of the neural pathways in the reading brain, meaning we start with the letterbox at the back of our brain, which is really responsible for the visual recognition of the word. Then we come over into the right side of the brain, the parietal lobe, which more specifically, we're looking at the angular gyrus, which is responsible for letter sound correspondence. And then to like really get to the full mapping or representation of the word, we're looking at the Wernicke's area, the Broca's area, which are connected by the articulate fasciculus. That's all about the language comprehension of the word, the meaning, its application, its semantics and syntax. So it's really the whole reading brain is activated in order for words to become mapped. Now, we know that there's like really two routes to reading. There's the route, like I just talked through, that you have to decode the word. That is called the dorsal route. The dorsal route is slower because it involves the work in the angular gyrus, where we decode the word. We have to explicitly go through the letter sound correspondence. But you and I, as adult readers, we don't decode at all, basically. If you think about all the reading that you've done in a day, there's probably no words that you have to decode. Maybe there's like a proper noun or a town name or a kid's last name, but everything else is in your sight vocabulary. You're relying on the ventral pathway. The ventral pathway overrides, doesn't even kind of go through the part of the brain that's about decoding, because you see the word, you know what it is and what it means. And that ventral pathway is more efficient. And that's what our aim for all kids is, to use the ventral pathway so that they instantly recognize the word and, again, have that precious cognitive energy to allot for comprehension.
Wow.
I know, it's so cool, right? Every time I talk about brain, I get chills because, like, this is wild stuff, and it's just amazing.
No, I took some good notes down. One of the things you were talking about, going back to the fry words and the dolch words, I've seen that analogy where it's like a fourth grade text and they've taken out all the sight words. And not only if you didn't know what those words were, what your level of comprehension of that text would look like. And it's just always mind blowing when I see that.
Yep. It totally falls apart. And again, our point of teaching any word, whether it's a high frequency word or whether it's just a normal word, like my friend's name Eva, is to get it so instantly recognized that it becomes a sight word. And unfortunately, both at home and in classrooms, we do a lot of things that don't actually support the orthographic mapping process. And by that, I would love for flashcards to go away. Flashcards are teaching kids to memorize words as whole units, and we don't memorize words as whole units. The average adult reader has 50,000 words. How did they get
Wow.
there? They got there through orthographic mapping, not from memorizing words. We cannot memorize words. And actually, if you go even geekier, if you look at eye tracking software, our eye, when it gazes at a word, gaze can only hold 2 or 3 letter units at once, meaning we don't actually look at a whole word. We look at chunks of words. So things like rote memorization or writing your spelling words 3 times or flashcarding is only teaching rote memorization of words. It is not supporting that 3-legged stool that orthographic mapping is. And I saw this as a classroom teacher. Kids would get the word right on the flashcard. They'd see it in the text and wouldn't get it. And you're like, what gives? I don't understand why there's no transfer. Because I was doing an instructional practice that does not actually support how the brain learns to read.
I have this list called the spelling flow list. I learned it at one of my other school districts. We talked about it on another podcast, but it talks to your 3-step system here. We do a pre-assessment. It's a pre-assessment of the commonly misspelled words, and whatever words the kids miss, we put on a list that they practice. But when I have them practice it, I talk about what's regular, what's irregular. We talk about the meaning of the word. They do write it down. They write it down to practice it. And then I just do a real quick pop quiz. If they get it correct, then they don't have to, if they get it 3 times in a row, then we don't practice it anymore. We move on to our next set of words. But then I always go back and review and make sure they still have those old words.
Yeah.
So
What I like about that is you're calling kids' attention to the phoneme grapheme correspondent and what's regular and what's not regular. I assume that you're doing this already, but we also have to have kids say the words. I'm struck every time I go into classrooms, even like middle school social studies classrooms, we're learning the word hieroglyphics. You have to say the word. So it really should look like, this is the word hieroglyphics. Say it with me, hieroglyphics. Turn to your partner, say it. And you can have fun in a million different ways. But in other words, to know a word, you have to have the phonology, the sound structure of words.
Right. That's amazing. Okay, so I have another question for you about comprehension. I'm so sorry, I keep going back to what we talked about. You had mentioned about the ventral pathway and being the most efficient to instantly recognize words. So is that something, if you think about kids who have dyslexia, who read a passage and they completely butcher it, and you're thinking there's no way they're going to understand anything they just read. But then you ask them their comprehension questions for the assessment you're doing or whatever, and then they get them all right, or most of them right. What is that pathway? Is that can't be the ventral pathway, right? That
No.
they're recognizing those words.
We know that kids with dyslexia, the area that is the highway under construction, like we're talking to each other in winter, there are potholes everywhere. You take your car, you get a flat tire. I always tell kids with dyslexia or who are just readers who struggle in general, the part of their brain that is doing the letter sound correspondence, that angular guidance, that is the highway under construction. And it's going to take you extra time to get through there. There's going to be a bottleneck. There's going to be pothole, because that is the work that's highway construction for kids with dyslexia. They get stuck in the grapheme phoneme correspondence. And so, again, as a natural kind of domino effect, typically their fluency is lower and typically it affects their comprehension. Not always, as it sounds like with some of your kids, because they may have great compensatory kind of skills, but that's...
Or is it the vocabulary that they have? Maybe a richer vocabulary?
It could be. It could be kids, you know, there's so many factors that go into that. It could be a passage that they already are somewhat familiar with. It could be that they really have strong inference skills. It could be that they really like you and want to do putting in the effort for you. So there's a lot of different things.
Okay, great to know.
So what are you researching next? What's on the highway for you?
Oh, so Katie, my colleague, Katie Pace Miles, who's a absolutely brilliant human being and researcher here in New York with me. And we are following up a book on our orthographic mapping book. We're a resource guide. If the first one was called Making Words Stick, we think this one is called Making Words Stickier. And the thing that we keep running across is teachers who say, which words should I teach, when, and how? And so this
Right.
book is meant to answer that question. Particularly looking at some of those high frequency words. Most high frequency words actually are phonetically regular and should be taught alongside whatever your phonics scope and sequence is. So we're going to give people resources around on that. That's what I'm doing right now. I'm also starting a research project with a colleague of mine named Brennan Chandler, who is looking at...
Yeah, we've had him on.
Oh, I just love him. He's
Yeah.
looking at some work around spelling, so I think we'll write about spelling. I have long been a spelling geek. I really believe that spelling is the best window to kids' linguistic understanding, but it's been overlooked. So I hope we produce something that's useful to help people understand where spelling fits in like a child's literacy development and what we can do to improve it. That should keep me busy for a little bit, and then I'll
For a little bit.
Yeah.
All right. So we are going to do what is called the lightning round. And it's just basically we're going to ask you a question. You just do your quick fire response.
Love it.
And I guess I'll start. Let's see. One word every teacher with students with dyslexia should understand deeply.
Oh, my lightning round paused. Explicit, meaning just the need for I do, we do, you do, modeling, practice, independent transfer.
Describe orthographic mapping in 10 seconds or less.
It is the process by which words become a part of our long-term memory.
That's a dictionary one. That's a good one.
Awesome. I love this one. Early bird or night owl?
Oh, early bird. I'm now at my teenager goes to bed after I do, so I'll be like, lock the door and turn off the lights. It's 9:15. It's time to go to get me.
Send the dog to the bedroom.
Totally.
Most common myth about sight words.
That they have to be memorized. All words have to be mapped, not memorized.
I like it.
Okay, so we didn't get to talk a lot about a lot of the steps, but in making word sticks, which of the 4 steps do teachers most often rush, and why does that matter?
Teachers often forget the first step where kids see the word and they say a word. Every word that we teach, whether it's a good old-fashioned SAT vocabulary word or a high-frequency word that kids are decoding, we have to make a phonological representation of the word. We have to say the word and we have to hear the word.
A word you wish teachers would quit calling a sight word.
Any word that is anything other than a sight word. I wish people would stop using sight words and high-frequency words
Yeah, I
interchangeably.
agree with that.
So you're a busy lady. You've written a million books and articles. What is your favorite thing to do to relax?
I am a big outdoorsy person, so I do a fair amount of hiking. I do a lot of kayaking in the spring. I am a complete fangirl of Bruce Springsteen, so go for a walk with the dog. You cannot ever be grumpy when you see dogs on the beach. Dogs playing on the beach is the best mental health therapy ever.
I agree.
Your joy of it. If I could start every morning that way, I would. Right now we're in a cold spell in New York. It's been about a high of 4 degrees. So dogs on the beach is going to have to wait till a sunnier day.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Nice.
All right. We're going to wrap it up with this last one. Finish this sentence. Words stick when students.
Words stick when students have a trifecta of how the word looks, what the word means, and how the word sounds.
We're writing it down. This has been a great interview. I'm so glad you were able to take time on Super Bowl Sunday for everybody's listening and sit down with us and talk. We really appreciate your time.
Well, I appreciate everything you are doing to get high quality instruction to parents and teachers and the students that you are working with. I always think that anybody who hosts a podcast about literacy, they're shining the light on the research and being really number one literacy advocates. So thank you for what you do in your time.
Thank you so much.
And hopefully you'll come back sometime.
I'd be happy to.
Because we still have a whole page of questions we didn't get to.
All right. You want to wrap it up?
Yes.
This is Aimee.
And Melissa.
And we're the Dyslexia Duo. Until next time.
Bye.
Bye.
The Dyslexia Duo hosts are Melissa Dean
And Aimee Rodenroth. The producer is Greg Rodenroth.
Dyslexia awareness is so important. Please share with your friends, family, and anyone who needs to know more about dyslexia.
Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and X at the Dyslexia Duo.
Thanks for listening.
Bye.
Bye.